Hello, good afternoon, Professor Mulso. I am doing my presentation on Step Families, Chapter 13. Um, and so the article that I found regarding what I want to go into, as well as the chapter that we were discussing in class, is called Environmental Transmission of DSM for Substance Use Disorders in Adoptive and Step Families. And so this is the DSM prior to the one that we're using right now. This study was done in 2005, which is why it's the DSM-4 and not the DSM-5. And so what this article is talking about is the rearing environment within biological, step, and adoptive families, and how the alcohol or drug use of the parent can influence the child. And so the rearing environment is actually a huge risk or protective factor that can be used. It can either benefit the child or it can harm the child. And that is also a predictor of whether or not the child will be using drugs and alcohol in the future. It mentioned that there's 442 individuals of adult adoptees from an alcoholic and non-alcoholic parent, as well as 1,859 stepchildren with an alcoholic or non-alcoholic stepfather. Two things about that. The conclusion didn't have any percentages or numbers when it came to the outcome of the study, so I'm not quite sure where these numbers play in other than the broad conclusion. I also thought that it was interesting that it says alcoholic and non-alcoholic parent, whereas the stepchildren, it said alcoholic or non-alcoholic stepfather. So I thought that was really interesting that the article made that distinction. I'm not totally sure why, but I think it's interesting to note. So what the article found was that, so it goes into adoptive and step parents, as well as a little bit of biological, but that wasn't the main focus of the article. So rearing by an alcoholic stepmother resulted in higher illicit drug use, whereas rearing by an alcoholic adoptive mother showed an increasing DSM-4 alcohol abuse. So meeting more of those DSM criteria for alcohol abuse. I wish that they went into why the stepmom was higher illicit drug use, whereas the adoptive mom was a DSM-4 alcohol abuse. However, this just goes to show that whether it is a stepmother or adoptive mother, it is still a predictor of some kind of drug or alcohol abuse. It seems as though rearing by an alcoholic adoptive father is the biggest risk factor because he has the adopted child has drug use, illicit drug dependence, and alcohol abuse. Again, I'm not sure why. They don't have a bunch of information as to why there's a difference, but still interesting to note. Rearing by an alcoholic parent has a greater influence on alcohol abuse and alcohol dependence. I think this is because sorry about my dog, there's more of destructive patterns of behavior rather than just the dependence of the alcoholic behaviors that are a result of that use. Paternal alcoholism resulted in greater illicit drug use and drug dependence. I thought that was interesting. Paternal, I'm assuming that means biological, step, or adopted. And then maternal and paternal cultural transmissions impacts a child's substance abuse disorder. So different cultures play a role in the rearing environment and how the child is raised, and so that can play a huge role into that substance use disorder. So this relates to families in a few ways. I think that oftentimes we're only focusing on the parent who is using the alcohol and not the more impacted population of children. So basically we just need to be focusing on the environment or the population that's more at risk, which would be the children. I've also noticed that there's a stereotype that really just focuses on alcoholic fathers rather than moms, especially now that we've seen the results of adoptive and stepmothers. So working on ending the stigma of basically fathers versus mothers, and that fathers are typically viewed as worse, which, I mean, yes. I mean, if you look at the adoptive stepfather back on this slide, we see that the alcoholic adoptive father was a predictor of the adoptee's drug use, illicit drug dependence, and alcohol abuse, but we still know that the adoptive and stepmother was also, the alcoholic adoptive or stepmother was also not great. Also, based on this study, we know that culture plays a huge role in how these behaviors and environments are created, as well as how that use disorder might be viewed. And so culture does play a huge role in how the child not only views their parents' substance use, but maybe their own. Um, I don't know if there's a specific theory about step families. I know that there's different theories that we have that can maybe explain how they function and the dysfunction. However, I wish there was one specific theory that kind of went into step families and adoptive families. So dynamics of step families and adopted families are hard to navigate. And so when you put drug and alcohol use in the mix, it makes it even more confusing and dysfunctional for children to be able to understand and adapt to, especially the fact that, I mean, substance use disorders we know causes significant family stress. I think it would be really helpful if we had more policies and procedures in place for step families and adopted families who have substance use disorders that are maybe impacting their family negatively. Maybe some parenting classes, family classes, some free therapy sessions maybe on how to work on the dynamic of the family, financial support, marital classes, affordable childcare, maybe more job security, things like that that could maybe ease some of the stress so that they could focus more on how to relieve that substance use. So I'm going to be going to graduate school for couples, marriage, and family therapy at Oklahoma State University. I'm extremely passionate about therapy, about ending the stigma of not only substance use, but divorce and step families. I have grown up in a step family for the past 8 years. And while I was a child, I do know the stress that it caused on the parents and how that impacted the children. And so I'm really a huge advocate for working on those roles and rules and dynamics within the family, especially because it's a new situation for everyone. The parents are struggling with how to teach the kids that aren't theirs. The kids are trying to figure out how to interact with a new step parent and new step siblings. And so working on that dynamic in that area is super important to me. I've also grown up with an alcoholic parent, and so I'm also very passionate about helping families that have drug and alcohol use present, and just developing coping skills and helping the children, especially because that can put a lot of children at risks, especially adolescents. And so trying to protect them from either different behaviors or substance use disorders as well. And so again, I really want to work with adolescents and dysfunctional families, and dysfunctional families can mean a lot of things. Just to make sure that those children are getting the adequate care that they need in order to be functional members of society and have a good life. And I just am really, really excited to start my career there in the fall and just start seeing clients and doing what I'm super passionate about. And yeah, that's my presentation.